Chicago. November, the kind of cold that doesn't ask permission. A city of 47 floors of glass and steel, of restaurants where a single plate costs more than most people make in a day, of rooms that decide before you even sit down whether you belong in them. Somewhere in that city tonight, a man is getting dressed. Not in the suit that costs $4,000. Not in the cashmere. Not in any of the 47 things hanging in a closet that announce, every morning, exactly who he has become. He reaches past all of it. To the back. To the dark corner. To something folded and forgotten and 35 years old. He puts it on. Then he picks up an envelope he hasn't been able to open for 3 years, reads 2 sentences, sets it down, and walks out the door looking like a man the city stopped noticing long ago. He knows exactly where he's going. What he doesn't know is who's already waiting for him there. The penthouse, Chicago, 5:47 p.m. The suit cost $4,000. Harlan Moss walked past it without looking, past the charcoal wool, past the navy cashmere, past the whole long row of things that announced every morning exactly who he had become. He went to the back of the closet, the dark corner, where things live when you can't throw them away but can't look at them either. The jacket was there, still folded, still sitting in the same position he'd left it 35 years ago, which told you something about how often he went to that corner. The fabric was stiff in the way old things get, not fragile, just settled, decided about what it was. He picked it up, held it, didn't smell it, because he knew what it would smell like. Chicago in November. A doorway on Wacker Street, the particular cold that doesn't stay outside. It follows you in, gets into the walls of you, and some part of you stays cold long after the circumstances change. Long after you have a penthouse and a driver and a chef who'll make whatever you want at whatever hour you want it. Some temperatures don't leave. He put the jacket on. The envelope was on his desk. He'd been walking past it for 3 years. Patricia had given it to him the morning after Evelyn's funeral, set it down with both hands and a look that asked nothing, which was the only reason he'd been able to take it at all. She'd said, "She wanted you to have this when you were ready." Then she'd left the room before he could respond, which was also the only reason he hadn't handed it back. He'd put it on the desk, walked away, come back, walked away again. For 3 years it sat there, in the same spot, slightly to the left of his laptop. He worked around it the way you work around a thing you've decided not to decide about yet. Some mornings he noticed it. Most mornings he didn't let himself. He was 58 years old. He had built a restaurant empire from a borrowed $8,000 and one person's belief that he could. He had survived things that break most people. He had watched his wife die by degrees over 14 months and he had not come apart. Not publicly, not in ways that showed. But he had not opened this envelope, because Evelyn was still in it, still writing to him, still present in the specific way that sealed things preserve their moment. Once he opened it, she would be finished saying whatever she'd said, and he was not ready for that. He was putting on a ruined jacket right now because he'd finally admitted he might never be ready. And waiting wasn't the same as honoring her. He sat down at the desk, picked up the envelope. His thumb found the edge of the flap the way thumbs do, before the mind has finished deciding. He stopped himself once, let out a breath, then opened it, 1 page. Her handwriting shakier than he'd known it. The chemotherapy had done that toward the end, made her hands unreliable, which she'd hated more than most of the other indignities. Evelyn, who had written thank you notes by hand her entire adult life, because she believed that ink on paper said something a screen couldn't. 3 sentences. Whitmore's on Calloway Street. Something is wrong there, Harlan. I tried to tell you twice. Please go see for yourself. He read it again, and once more, I tried to tell you twice. He pressed back through memory with real effort, looking for the conversation, looking for the evening she'd brought this up and the way he'd responded. He found shapes. The outline of a dinner where she'd said something about Calloway. A phone call, maybe. His own voice saying something like, "I'll look into it or let me check with the regional team. Ev, I'm sure it's fine." He couldn't find the specific moment, which was, somehow, the worst part. Not that he'd dismissed her. That he'd dismissed her so thoroughly he couldn't even locate it in his memory. It had landed without weight, come and gone without leaving a mark. I tried to tell you twice. He took his wedding ring off. He'd moved it to his right hand after she died. Couldn't take it off entirely, couldn't wear it where it belonged, because where it belonged was on his left hand in the life they were supposed to still be living. But tonight he took it off completely and set it on top of the letter, on top of her words. Then he went to the door. Patricia was there. She'd been his executive assistant for 12 years, which meant she had long stopped needing to explain why she appeared in doorways before he reached them. "The car's ready," she said. "I'll be on the west side of Callaway. 30 seconds if you signal." "I know." "Legal team is on standby." "All four, I know." She looked at him. The particular look of someone who has watched a person make difficult decisions for a long time and has learned to tell the difference between the ones that are hard because they're complicated and the ones that are hard because they matter. "Harlan," he looked at her. "Be careful," she said. Not the usual kind of careful. He understood the difference. He nodded once and left Southside Chicago Nadia's apartment. 5:15 a.m. She was awake before the alarm. She always was lately. Her body had developed its own schedule, calibrated to the inch before Bea woke up. That narrow corridor of silence between 4:30 and 6, where the apartment was still and she could be something other than a mother and a server and a woman doing arithmetic in her head. She went to Bea's room first. Her daughter slept tightly, curled on her side the way she had since she was an infant, toes tucked under herself, hair loose around her face. The nightlight made the room orange. The small sound of her breathing, a little heavier than it should be, always a little heavier, the asthma constant and low grade even on good nights, filled the quiet. Nadia stood in the doorway, just looked. 7 years old, gap in her front teeth, absolute certainty that her mother would handle whatever needed handling. Bea had never questioned that, not once, which was either a gift or a weight depending on the hour. Right now, 5:15 in the morning, it was both. She went to the kitchen, filled Bea's nebulizer for the 6:30 treatment, set it on the counter where her daughter would find it without being told. They had their routines, the two of them, tight and practiced, a small machine running on its own momentum. Then she sat down at the table, opened the notebook, not a journal. She didn't have the luxury of a journal. This was a ledger, columns of numbers in her own handwriting, updated every 2 weeks when her check came in. Money coming in on the left, money going out on the right. The difference between them at the bottom, which was almost always in the red, almost always exactly as bad as she'd expected, almost always survivable. This month's bottom number stared up at her. She looked at it for a moment, then closed the notebook. Her phone buzzed. Garrett Finch, restaurant manager, 6:45 text. "Important evening tonight. Don't give me anything to deal with." She read it. Didn't reply. 3 years at Whitmore's on Callaway had given her a specific fluency in Garrett's messages. "Don't give me anything to deal with" meant there was already something to deal with. It was already in motion, and her job was to not add to it, which was different from nothing happening. Nothing happening would have been no text at all. She got dressed. Made coffee she drank standing at the counter because sitting felt like a luxury she hadn't earned yet. Checked the weather. 38 degrees, which meant her coat that she'd been meaning to replace for 2 winters was going to be inadequate again. She put it on anyway. At the door she stopped, looked back at the apartment, small living room, Bea's drawings on the refrigerator. The stack of bills on the counter that she'd organized by due date, because organizing things by due date was the closest she could get to controlling them. Her mother's voice very clear. The cost of silence is paid by someone else. She didn't know why that surfaced right now. She hadn't been thinking about silence. She was thinking about an 11-hour shift and whether the nebulizer had enough solution and whether she'd remembered to text her neighbor about picking Bea up. But there it was. Her mother had died when Nadia was 24. Already a mother herself, already alone. Bea's father had been gone since before Bea arrived, which was its own wound she'd long since stopped pressing on. Her mother had said a lot of things in those final weeks, the kind of things people say when they've accepted what's coming and want to leave something behind that matters. Most of it Nadia had tucked away, imperfectly remembered, surfacing at odd angles. That one she remembered exactly. She went to work. Whitmore's on Callaway Street, 6:45 p.m. The restaurant looked exactly right. That was the first problem. Harlan had been in the industry for 30 years, and he'd learned, slowly, then all at once, that the establishments with the most to hide were always the ones that looked exactly right from the outside. The precise signage, the warm glow through the glass, the sound of appropriate music whenever the door opened, calibrated to reach the street without overwhelming it. He stood across the road for a moment before crossing, looked at it. Whitmore's on Callaway had been in the portfolio for 11 years. Mid-tier luxury, not his most expensive location, not his most casual. The price point that attracted people who wanted to feel that they'd chosen well. The quarterly reports had been declining for 2 years, with explanations that sounded reasonable. Demographic shifts in the neighborhood, post-pandemic adjustment, increased competition from newer concepts. All plausible, all manageable, all the kind of thing you accepted without examining if you were managing from a comfortable distance. He crossed the street and walked through the door. The room opened up around him. Chandeliers adjusted to cast warmth rather than light. White tablecloths. The smell of seared protein and expensive wine doing exactly what it was designed to do, telling the body that it was in the right place, that the right choices had been made. He stood just inside the entrance, took it in, not the decor, the mechanics, the angle of the servers, the clustering of tables near the back where someone had squeezed in 2 extra covers. A managerial decision, not a design one, made to increase revenue per square foot without any corresponding thought about the room's experience. Small, telling, the kind of alteration that happened in restaurants where money was the first calculation, not the third. The hostess saw him. Her face moved through 4 positions in under 3 seconds. Professional greeting. Recognition that something was wrong with the picture. Recalibration. Containment. She was young, mid-20s, trained to handle difficult moments without showing she was handling them. This one was slightly outside her training. "Good evening, sir. Table for 1, Harlan said. "Of course. Do you have a no reservation?" She looked past him in the specific way of someone looking for their manager without appearing to look for their manager, which meant the manager appeared. Garrett Finch moved like a man who'd spent 5 years learning to own every room he walked into. He was good at it. Silver at the temples worn like an achievement. Tie knotted tight. The tell of a man who dressed for impression rather than comfort, which told you something about what he thought other people were for. His smile arrived before he did. "Good evening." The warmth of it was precise, calibrated. "I'm afraid we're fully committed this evening." Harlan reached into the jacket. Pulled out cash. Not a wallet. Cash itself, a fold of it. The kind of amount that changes what's possible in a conversation. Garrett looked at it. Looked at Harlan. Ran the math 3 seconds. "Right this way," he said. He led Harlan to table 9. The worst table in the restaurant. Tucked in the far corner near the service entrance, where the kitchen door occasionally swung out and brought with it a gust of different air. Oil and heat, and the smell of a commercial refrigeration unit that needed cleaning. Far enough from the main room that the lighting dropped from warm to merely adequate, and tilted. Very slightly, the kind of tilt you noticed when your water glass shifted without reason. The table they used for people they wanted gone. Harlan sat down without reacting. Garrett lingered long enough to perform courtesy. Handed over the menu with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Said something about the specials. Walked away and stopped. Turned back to scan the floor. His eyes found Nadia Okafor at table 4 refilling water. "You," he said, just loud enough. Table 9. Not an assignment, a punishment. Both of them understood. Nadia set down the water pitcher. Walked toward table 9 with the even pace of someone absorbing that information and deciding what to do with it. She'd been given the bad tables before. Garrett assigned them when he wanted to say something without saying it. When he wanted to remind a particular person of how much they depended on him. She reached the table, picked up the empty glass, replaced it with a full one, and as she set it down, she glanced at the man's face. Not the professional scan of a server checking whether a guest needed anything, but the specific involuntary attention she paid to people who felt wrong for their context. This man felt wrong for his context. His clothes were what they were. The jacket, the worn pants, the boots with the cracked sole on the left. But his shoulders were straight in a way that took effort. Not the ease of someone comfortable, the discipline of someone maintaining. His eyes moved across the room the way eyes move when they're recording, not resting. He held the menu in his left hand and he wasn't reading it. He was watching the room the same way she watched rooms. She set the glass down and then she saw his right hand. On the table, palm down. A scar running from the base of his thumb to his wrist. White, smooth, the particular texture of old burn damage that had healed as fully as burn damage heals. She went still. Not visibly, not in a way anyone watching would catch. But inside, behind the professional steadiness, something stopped moving. She knew that scar, not from a photograph, not from an article her brother had once read her. That wasn't it. She knew it the way you know things that entered you during a period of grief. When the mind records details it has no reason to record because the central event is too large to look at directly, and so you look at everything around it instead. 14 years ago, Northwestern Memorial Hospital, room 412, her father in the bed, the disease in its final negotiation. Most people had stopped coming by then. Not because they didn't care, because hospitals in that phase are hard, and people have lives, and the weight of someone else's dying asks more than most relationships are structured to hold. She understood that. She'd long since made peace with it. But a man had come, afternoon, Tuesday. She'd been in the hallway when he arrived, hadn't wanted to go in, hadn't wanted to interrupt something that felt private. She'd watched through the narrow window in the door. He'd sat beside the bed for over an hour. Her father was mostly asleep. The man hadn't seemed to need him awake. He just sat there, present in a way that didn't require anything from the room. When he'd left, she'd seen his right hand through the glass as he stood. The scar white, long, unmistakable. She had thought about that hand for years. Not constantly. Grief doesn't work in constants. It works in unexpected moments. In the gap between two things when your mind reaches for something and finds instead a detail you didn't know you'd kept. She'd thought, who was he? She'd thought, I should have gone in and asked. She'd thought about it the way you think about the sentences you didn't say, the doors you didn't open, the chances that closed before you understood they were chances. And now, here, table 9, don't be certain, she told herself. Don't make this bigger than it is. You saw a scar for 30 seconds through a hospital window 14 years ago. That is not. Except she was certain, some things you know without knowing how you know them. The scar was the same. The stillness of the man was the same. That particular quality of presence she'd observed through the glass. The ability to exist in a room without needing it to perform for you. She looked at his face. He was looking at the room. Then he turned and looked at her. Not the look of a guest checking on a server. The look of someone who has noticed that they've been seen. Can I get you something to start? She asked. Steady, completely steady. Just water for now, he said. She nodded, turned, walked back into the room. Her hands were not shaking. She made them not shake. The kitchen, 7:31 p.m. The kitchen had its own weather. Hot, pressurized, the noise of a full service running, tickets printing, flames adjusting, the rhythm of 6 people moving in a space designed for 4 because Garrett had decided the labor savings were worth the friction. Tomas Ibarra worked the line with the focused economy of someone who had been doing this long enough that the muscle memory ran ahead of thought. His hands moved, the food moved, the tickets cleared. He was good at this. Good enough that on different nights, in a different operation, he might have had his own kitchen by now. He knew that. He didn't let himself think about it much, because thinking about it too much made this one harder to be in. His wife was 7 months pregnant. Her name was Rosie. She was home right now, probably already in bed, probably reading the novel she'd been working through for 3 weeks, because she fell asleep after 8 pages every night. He'd called her on his break, and she'd told him the baby had been pressing on her ribs all day, and she was exhausted, and she loved him and he should eat something before his shift ended. He was going to be a father, 47 days give or take. The idea of it still arrived sometimes with the force of something new. Not anxiety, something larger than anxiety. The understanding that the person he was right now was the person his child would first understand as father. That everything he did between now and when they were old enough to form real memories was going into that foundation. He flipped something on the grill. Didn't think about it anymore. Couldn't during service. Garrett appeared at his elbow, not loudly. That was Garrett's thing, he materialized. He'd developed the skill over 5 years of managing a floor, the ability to be suddenly present without the warning of approach. It kept people slightly off balance, which Tomas had decided long ago was the point. The guest at table 9, Garrett said. Low, conversational, like they were discussing the weather. When the order comes in, use the Wagyu from the return yesterday. Tomas moved a pan off the heat, set it aside. The one from the Hendricks table, Garrett continued. That sat on the pass for 40 minutes before they sent it back. We froze that, Tomas said. Right, Garrett, he turned, met the man's eyes. That piece has been in the temperature danger zone. It was out for almost 2 hours before we put it back. If someone eats that, Then they have an unpleasant evening, Garrett said. Which, all things considered, is the worst reasonable outcome. That's not. The guest at table 9, Garrett said without raising his voice, is someone who walked in off the street. He is not a food critic. He is not a health inspector. He is not anyone who will be believed if he calls a number and complains. A pause, the kind of pause that comes before the real point. You dropped a case of Barolo last month. I told the ownership report it was a shipment error. That's $1,800 I absorbed for you. Thomas said nothing. Rosie's delivery is in 6 weeks, Garrett continued. The insurance you're on through this restaurant covers the hospital. The kitchen noise continued around them. Tickets printing, someone calling a pickup. Do, the Garrett said. When it comes in, he walked away. Thomas stood at the line. The grill needed attention. He gave it attention. He plated something and called it and moved to the next ticket because that was what service required. Forward motion, constant forward motion, no space to stop and examine what you just agreed to. He had not agreed to it. He had also not said no. He knew the difference. He was standing in that difference right now, and it felt exactly as bad as he would have predicted. Nadia came through the kitchen side door. Not to pick up, she went straight to the far end, to the spice station, back to the room. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was containing something. He'd worked alongside her for 2.5 years. He could read her the way you learn to read people you spend 60 hours a week beside, she'd heard. He knew it the moment she moved past him without looking at him. She'd been standing at the spice station long enough. The angle of the kitchen, the way sound bounced off the metal surfaces, she'd heard everything. He wanted to say her name. He didn't. Because saying her name would require him to have something to follow it with. And he didn't have anything to follow it with that would make the next 10 minutes different from what they were about to be. He turned back to the line, told himself he'd figure it out. He was lying. Staff bathroom, then the floor, 7:44 p.m. The staff bathroom had no cameras. Every other room in Whitmore's on Callaway did, the dining room, the kitchen, the service corridor, the break area. Garrett had petitioned the building owner to add the bathroom when he'd taken over, citing productivity concerns. The building owner had said no, citing basic privacy law, and the refusal had persisted through 2 lease renewals. Nadia knew this. She locked the door, looked at herself in the mirror above the sink. Her reflection looked back, a woman in a black server's uniform, hair pulled tight, the particular flatness in her eyes that comes from a long shift when something unexpected has been added to the usual weight. She ran the calculation, not because she hadn't run it already, because running it again might produce a different answer. It didn't. Say something, she loses this job, maybe tonight, maybe in 3 days when Garrett constructs a story that holds up. She loses the insurance, she loses the income. Bia's inhaler refill was due Thursday, $22 with her current plan, which she would not have if she lost this job. Darius's tuition was due at the end of the month. The rent came out automatically on the 1st. She had a cushion of 11 days of expenses in her checking account. Stay silent. The man at table 9 eats the wagyu, gets sick, maybe seriously sick, maybe not, maybe he has the constitution for it and it passes as a bad night. But she would know. She would know that she stood in a kitchen and heard a plan to harm someone, and then walked back out onto a floor and did her job, and that knowing would be something she carried. She thought about her father, not his death, before that, the way he'd moved through the world. Without announcement, without requiring recognition, just doing the next right thing, and then the one after that, as if the question of whether it was worth doing had already been settled long ago and didn't need to be reopened every time. She thought about the man who had come to sit beside him, whoever he was, whatever his reasons. He'd shown up and stayed and then left without asking for anything. That was the part she'd never been able to stop thinking about. The leaving without asking for anything. The purity of just being there. She thought about the scar. Don't make it about that, she told herself. This decision doesn't get to be about a scar you saw through a hospital window. If that man at table 9 were a stranger, you'd never have any reason to connect to anything. You'd still be standing here with the same information and the same choice. She was right, and the choice would be the same. She tore a piece of paper from her order pad. Small, matchbook-sized, smaller, found the pen in her apron pocket. Her hand was shaking. She held it still against the counter. Wrote, "Don't eat. The meat is bad. This was planned. Please trust me. Read it back." Folded it. Smaller, smaller again. until it sat flat in the curve of her palm, invisible. She looked at herself one more time. Her mother's voice so clear it felt spoken. The cost of silence is paid by someone else. I know, Mom, she said quietly. To the mirror, to no one, unlocked the door, walked out. The kitchen was running. Tomas at the grill, moving through the motions of a man trying to stay inside the task and not look up. The Wagyu ticket had not yet come in. Table 9's order was still pending. She had time, not much. She walked to the pass and picked up 2 plates for table 6. The pickup she'd actually come back here for. Her cover, the reason she'd come through the kitchen at all. She carried them out, delivered them, smiled at table 6 with the professional warmth she'd spent 3 years developing, went back for the Wagyu. It was ready. Tomas had plated it. Of course he had. The ticket had come in and his hands had done what his hands always did during service, move to the next thing. She looked at the plate, mahogany sear, precise pink center, the reduction in a careful crescent, garnish exact, temperature perfect. It looked exactly right. She picked it up, walked to table 9. The route was 30 feet. She counted them the way she counted things when she needed something concrete to focus on. 10 feet. The room moved around her, other tables occupied with their evenings, conversations she wasn't inside, a Saturday night running exactly as Saturday nights were supposed to run. 5 feet, she arrived, set the plate down with both hands, exact placement, positioned the silverware, adjusted the bread plate slightly, a natural motion, a server's motion, one hand moving while the other settled. Her left hand reached across to set the fork, her right hand, dropping to his side of the table, brushed the back of his right hand. Half a second. The paper moved. She felt his fingers close around it, not a grab, a receipt. The small controlled closure of a hand that had been waiting without visibly waiting. Enjoy your dinner, sir, she said. Turned, walked, did not run, did not look back, did not let anything change in the pace of her breathing until she was 8 feet away and facing a different table entirely, water pitcher in hand, doing the job, being invisible in the professional sense of the word. Behind her at table 9, a man in a ruined jacket read 4 sentences written in a hand that had been shaking. Read them again. Set the paper flat on his palm beneath the tablecloth. Looked at the plate, then at his right hand. The scar. 35 years ago, he had been 23 and hungry in a way that bypasses dignity and goes straight to something older. He had been going through the garbage behind a restaurant on Michigan Avenue, looking for anything that was still food, when a chef found him. The chef had not called the police. The chef had picked up a pot of water that had been coming to a boil and poured it over Harlan's hands. And laughed. The kitchen staff had laughed. Someone had said, "That's what you get." He had built Whitmore's. He had built the entire operation, all 42 locations, every award and every expansion, and every carefully worded mission statement about hospitality and dignity, so that no one would ever say that inside a restaurant that bore his name. And someone tonight in his restaurant had planned to poison a man they thought no one would believe. He did not touch the food. He looked at the room, and for the first time since he'd walked through the door, he let himself feel something other than observation. He let himself feel it, then he put it away. There was still work to do. The evening was not finished. Outside on Callaway Street, the black car sat on the west side with its lights off. Patricia had her laptop open. She was reading a file she'd pulled a week ago as routine preparation, staff background checks, standard procedure for any location Harlan visited. She'd opened Nadia Okafor's file, read down to the bottom, Marcus Okafor, deceased March 2010. She sat with that for a moment, then opened a second window. Harlan's personal calendar archive, which she maintained with the completeness of someone who knew that the past had a way of becoming relevant again. She went back to 2010, March 14th, Northwestern Memorial, Room 412, Marcus, 2 p.m., no last name, one of maybe 6 entries in 12 years of calendars that didn't use a full name. She'd always understood those entries as people too close to need the formality. People where the first name was enough because it was complete. She cross-referenced. It took her 4 minutes. Marcus Okafor, Room 412, admitted February 28, 10, deceased March 15, 2010. One day after Harlan's visit. She looked at the restaurant door across the street, looked back at her screen. She'd also pulled during this same week of preparation the financial archive from 1994, digitized years ago when they'd moved the company records. She'd been looking for baseline documentation for a different reason entirely. But she'd seen it, A handwritten ledger entry. Harlan's own writing. M. Okafor, personal loan $8,000, no interest, no contract. Repaid 1997 with interest and in the margin. M says just build the thing. I will. She held her phone, started to call him, stopped. She knew his timing, she'd spent 12 years learning it. Whatever was happening inside that building right now needed to finish on its own terms. Her information would land better after, when there was room to hold it. She set the phone down and waited. The cold came through the car windows in the small ways cold always does, around edges, through seams, uninvited. She waited anyway. Whitmore's dining room, table 9, 8:02 p.m., 26 minutes. The plate hadn't moved. Garrett Finch stood at the bar with a glass of sparkling water he hadn't touched and watched table 9 with the focused stillness of a man performing casualness for an audience that wasn't looking at him. The Wagyu sat exactly where it had been placed. Perfect sear, cold now probably, untouched in a way that was becoming minute by minute a problem. Because men who sat at table 9 didn't do this. Table 9 was designed to produce a specific outcome, the draft from the service door. The inadequate light, the tilt, the accumulated small discomforts that told a person, without anyone having to say it, that they had made a mistake coming here and would be more comfortable somewhere else. In 5 years of managing this floor, Garrett had watched dozens of guests absorb that message and leave, some quickly, some after a drink. Almost none stayed through an entire meal. This man was on his second water refill and hadn't touched his food. And he was watching the room. Not the way guests watched rooms, the comfortable, unfocused gaze of people who are present in a pleasant place and letting it wash over them. He was watching the way Garrett watched rooms, recording, cataloging, tracking the movement of staff and the dynamics between tables and the small operational decisions that revealed themselves in how a floor ran. That was wrong. That was the specific wrongness Garrett had been feeling for the past 20 minutes, sharpening now into something he could name. This man was not behaving like a man who had wandered into a restaurant above his situation and was grateful for the meal. He was behaving like someone who knew exactly what a restaurant was supposed to look like and was measuring this one against that knowledge. Garrett set down the sparkling water, smoothed his tie, walked to table 9. Everything to your satisfaction this evening? Warm, attentive. The voice he used for difficult conversations that needed to not appear difficult. I noticed you haven't started your meal. If there's something wrong with the preparation, our kitchen is happy to. The preparation looks fine, the man said. Of course, we just want to make sure. I'm enjoying the room, he said, even unhurried, the tone of someone who had nowhere to be and knew it. Garrett waited for more. More didn't come. Of course, Garrett said again. Please don't hesitate to let us know. He walked away. Back to the bar, back to the sparkling water. His eyes moved to Nadia Okafor, who was at table 11, refilling water with the careful precision of someone performing a task that was keeping her hands busy while her mind was somewhere else. Too careful, that was the tell. Nadia was always professional. He'd give her that even now, even in this moment when he was calculating what she'd done and what he was going to do about it. She was one of his better servers technically. But this was a different quality. This was the steadiness of someone who had stepped off a cliff and was concentrating very hard on something other than falling. He knew that specific steadiness. He'd worn it himself, the first time he'd moved money he shouldn't have moved, had stood in his own kitchen making coffee with extraordinary care, as if precision in small things could compensate for the large thing he'd just done. He looked at table 9, looked at Nadia, looked at the untouched plate. He needed to move carefully. Reactive was for people who hadn't prepared. He'd prepared for many things, not for this exact configuration, but for the general category of problems that required managing quickly and cleanly. The key was sequence. First, establish a reason. Second, execute without creating a larger scene than the one he was closing. Third, make sure the variables that had gone off script understood they had gone off script and what that cost. He went to the kitchen first. Tomas was on the line. Garrett appeared at his shoulder, the materialization, the thing he'd practiced. Table 9, he said. Lo, has he eaten? Tomas kept his eyes on the grill. I don't know, I've been on the line. He hasn't. A beat. The grill needed attention. Tomas gave it attention. Tomas. He turned, and Garrett saw it immediately, the face of a man who had been standing in something uncomfortable for the past 30 minutes and had run out of ways to stand in it without it showing. Guilt, yes. But underneath that, something more useful to Garrett, the expression of someone who had heard something and was afraid of what knowing it made them responsible for. Did you say anything, Garrett said, to anyone? No, did anyone come through while we were talking? A pause. Very small, the kind of pause that answers before the words do. No, Tomas said. Garrett looked at him for 3 seconds. Long enough to let the man know that the pause had been noted. Long enough to let the weight of that settle. Good, he said. Walked out, back to the floor. He needed a reason, and the reason was already presenting itself. Table 4. Mrs. Wentworth regulars, the kind of guests who spent freely and complained freely and expected both responses to be taken seriously. She'd been glancing toward table 9 for the past 10 minutes, with the expression of a woman who felt that her evening was being impinged upon by something she hadn't consented to. He went to her first. Is everything? Garrett. She kept her voice appropriate for the room, which meant she kept it low enough to seem discreet and loud enough for her husband and the couple at the adjacent table to hear. I don't know what the situation is with the gentleman in the corner, but the ambiance we come here for is not. I understand completely, Garrett said. I'll handle it right now. She settled back into her chair with the satisfaction of someone who had spoken and been heard. Garrett straightened his jacket, walked toward table 9, and on the way, without breaking stride, made a decision about something else entirely. Nadia, across the room, just loud enough, the precise volume of a manager addressing a staff member, public enough to establish context, quiet enough to seem like procedure. She looked up, set down the water pitcher, walked toward him, each step measured, her face in the specific arrangement that meant she was fully aware of what was coming and had decided exactly how she was going to receive it. She stopped. I've received a complaint, Garrett said. The warmth in his voice now had a different quality, still present but load-bearing in a different direction. Multiple guests have indicated that you interfered with the guest at table 9 in a way that was inappropriate, that you approached him unsolicited and had an interaction that made him uncomfortable. That's not what happened, she said, quiet, certain. The reports I received suggest. I brought him water and his food, she said. That's the entirety of what I did. Nadia, he let her name sit there, let the weight of what it meant, her job, her insurance, the infrastructure her life was built on, sit in it. I have no choice but to suspend you pending a full investigation. Please collect your things. The room, not loudly. No one gasped, no one put down their fork and stared. But rooms have a way of registering things without registering them. Conversations that were running at one level dropped half a register. Eyes that had been pointed at plates shifted slightly toward the corner, the ambient awareness that passes through a full restaurant when something is happening that isn't on the menu. Nadia stood, looked around the room. The other servers were busy, extraordinarily busy suddenly. Carlos at the bar, Jenny at the host stand. Tomas, visible in the kitchen window for a moment before he turned away. The guests watched with the removed curiosity of people observing something that was happening to someone else, which made it interesting rather than uncomfortable, which was its own kind of verdict on the room. She was alone, she had known she would be. I didn't do anything wrong, one more time. Not pleading, stating. For the record, for the room that was pretending not to listen. I served him his food, that's all. Your things, Garrett said. Gently, like he was sorry about it, she held his gaze for 2 seconds. Then she went to get her coat. From the corner from table 9, Harlan Moss watched every second of it. He watched the way Garrett had positioned himself, slightly to Nadia's right, which meant she was facing away from most of the room. Watched the way the volume had been calibrated, loud enough to establish the public nature of the action, quiet enough to seem considerate. Watched the way her colleagues had found things to do that required their eyes elsewhere. He watched her walk toward the back. Straight spine, even step, the dignity of someone who had decided that this specific man was not going to see anything he could use. He thought about her hand. The paper. 4 sentences she'd written while her hands were shaking, which he could tell from the slight unevenness of the letters, the way the pen had pressed harder in some places than others. He thought about Evelyn. I tried to tell you twice. He sat for another moment, let it complete. Then he stood up. She didn't do anything wrong. His voice. From table 9. Not loud, he didn't need loud. The room's attention was already close to this corner. It arrived the rest of the way on its own. Garrett turned. The warmth in his face reorganized itself into something that was still technically a smile. "Sir, I appreciate. She brought me water, she brought me my food, she was courteous and professional throughout." A pause. "That's what happened. Multiple guests have, I was the guest." Silence. A real one. The kind that happens when a room has been paying attention without admitting it, and the central thing finally gets said. "I was the guest at that table, and I'm telling you what occurred." Garrett looked at him. Really looked, for the first time tonight, not the 3-second assessment he'd run at the door, but the longer, harder look of someone who is recalculating from the beginning. The jacket, the boots, the dirt, and underneath all of it, something that didn't fit any of the categories he'd put this man in when he'd walked through the door. The stillness, the complete unperformative stillness. "I appreciate your perspective," Garrett said, still warm, the warmth costing him something now. "However, this is an internal matter, and I'd ask you not to. You're firing her in front of 40 people, Harlan said. "If you're going to do that, the least she deserves is honesty about why." The woman at table 4, Mrs. Wentworth, who had asked for this, had set her wine glass down. Her husband was examining his risotto with great concentration. Garrett felt the phones, not recording yet, but reaching. The preparatory movement of hands toward pockets that had become reflexive in this decade, in these rooms, at these moments. If this became a scene, if footage circulated of a man in ruined clothes being removed from a restaurant while staff looked on, the arithmetic of that publicity ran badly no matter how you arranged it. He needed a different approach. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to need you to sit down." Then turned to the room, easy, practiced, the gesture of a captain restoring order, and said at the ambient volume of reassurance, "We apologize for the disruption. Please enjoy your evening." He walked away, leaving Harlan standing, leaving the room with its decision about what it had just seen, and leaving, somewhere in the back hallway, a woman getting her coat who had not heard any of it. The kitchen doorway, 8:09 p.m. Tomas stood at the pass. Service was running, tickets moving. His hands doing what his hands did, plating, calling, moving, while the part of him that existed outside the line watched the dining room through the small window above the pass. He'd seen Garrett confront Nadia, had watched from this window, unable to hear the words but not needing to. The positioning was enough. The way she'd stood. The way she'd walked away afterward. He knew what had happened. He'd known the moment Garrett came back from the kitchen with that particular settled quality, the quality of a man who has decided something and is now executing it. He'd known then what the execution would look like and who it would land on. He should have said something. That thought had been running on a loop for 20 minutes, wearing a groove. He should have said something when Garrett gave him the order. Should have said, "No, that's not happening, and if you push me I'll tell you why," loudly in front of the whole kitchen. Should have done what Nadia had done, which was look at the situation clearly and make the harder call. Instead, Fiddy'd stood at the grill and told himself he'd figure it out. His phone buzzed. He pulled it from his apron. Kitchen rule said no phones on the line, Garrett's rule, which he was violating right now in full view of Garrett's window, and found he couldn't manage to care. "Rosie," he answered. "Hey," her voice, warm and tired, the specific warmth of someone who has been uncomfortable all day and is calling because talking to you is the easiest part of the day. "Are you on break?" "Kind of," he said. "The baby's been on my ribs since 4 o'clock. I think she's trying to get out early." "She's not trying to get out early. You don't know that. She's very determined." A pause. The small sound of her shifting position. "Also she moved, like really moved, not the flutters, a real kick. I felt it go all the way across." He closed his eyes, just for a second, his child, moving with intention, making her presence known. 40-some days from being in the world, from being a person he would hold, from being someone who would, someday, years from now, look at him and understand, in the way children understand their parents, who he had been in the moments that counted. "Which side?" he asked. "Left." Then she moved to the right, like she was checking the whole space. "She's mapping the area," he said. "She's thorough. Like you," Rosie laughed. "Soft, come home before 1, okay? I don't sleep well when you're not here." "I'll try." He hung up, stood with the phone in his hand, looked through the window at the dining room. Nadia was gone. The back hallway led to the staff area, which led to the side exit. She was probably already getting her coat. Would be out the door in 3 minutes. He looked at the plate that was still sitting at table 9, untouched. The guest was standing now, he could see that much. Something was happening in the dining room. Some exchange between the guest and Garrett that Tomas couldn't hear. He thought about his daughter. He thought about who he was going to be when she was old enough to see it. He thought about Nadia walking out a side door because he had stood in a kitchen and nodded when he should have said no. He took off his apron, set it on the edge of the pass, walked toward the dining room. Tomas stood at the pass. Service was running, tickets moving, his hands doing what his hands did, plating, calling, moving forward, while the part of him that existed outside the line watched the dining room through the small window above the pass. He'd seen Garrett confront Nadia, had watched from this window, unable to hear the words but not needing to. The positioning was enough. The way she'd stood. The way she'd walked away afterward, back straight, pace even, taking the only thing she had left in this building, which was the pace of her own walking. He knew what had happened. He'd known the moment Garrett came back from the kitchen with that settled quality, the quality of a man who has decided something and is now executing it. He'd known then what the execution would look like and who it would land on. His phone buzzed. Kitchen rules said no phones on the line. Garrett's rule. He pulled it out anyway, in full view of the cameras, and found he couldn't manage to care about that particular violation right now. "Rosie," he answered. "Hey," her voice, warm and tired in the specific way of someone who has been uncomfortable all day and is calling because talking to you is the easiest part of everything. "Are you on break?" "Kind of," he said. She moved, Rosie said, and her voice shifted, the tiredness lifting under something else. Like really moved. Not the flutters, a real kick. I felt it go all the way across. He closed his eyes. His child, making herself known, 40-some days from being in the world, from being a person he would hold, from being someone who would years from now understand who he had been in the moments that counted. "Which side?" he asked. "Left first." Then she moved to the right, like she was checking the whole space. "She's thorough," he said. "Like you. Rosie La Soft. Real, come home before 1, okay? I'll try." He hung up, stood with the phone in his hand, looked through the pass window at the dining room. Nadia was gone, had already been gone for several minutes now, through the back hallway, toward the side exit. The guest at table 9 was still sitting, still not eating. Something was happening at the front of the room. He could see it in the way bodies had reoriented, the way the ambient movement of the floor had changed. He looked at his phone, at Rosie's name on the screen. He thought about the baby mapping her space, left then right, checking the whole area she was going to enter. He thought about what kind of space she was going to enter. What kind of father would be waiting in it. He took off his apron, set it on the edge of the pass, walked into the dining room. The moment Harlan pressed the button on his phone, he was already moving. He stood and removed his left shoe. The room nearest to table 9 had been tracking him with the low-grade attention of people managing their curiosity. When he removed the shoe, that management dissolved. Conversations dropped. Forks paused. He reached into the soul. The phone was small, matte black, fitted into a compartment built into the shoe's structure. A precaution he'd added years ago after an incident at a different location had taught him the value of recording things that couldn't be recorded visibly. He pressed the call button. 30 seconds, he counted them. On 29, the front door opened. Patricia walked in first. Charcoal suit, heels on the marble, unhurried, deliberate, the sound of someone who has arrived exactly when she meant to. 2 lawyers behind her, briefcases already open. 4 security in plain clothes, arranging themselves along the perimeter with the quiet efficiency of people who found the drama of entrances unnecessary. The room registered all of it. The ambient jazz kept playing, which was the strangest part. The music continuing underneath the new architecture of the moment, as if the sound system hadn't yet been told what was happening. Patricia crossed to the center of the room and stopped. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice carried without effort, "I apologize for the interruption to your evening. My name is Patricia Hollins. I serve as executive assistant to Harlan Moss, founder and owner of the Whitmore's Restaurant Group." The sound that moved through the room then was not a gasp. It was the collective adjustment of 40 people recalibrating simultaneously, the compressed breath of a room processing information that changes the meaning of the past 90 minutes. Mr. Moss has been dining at this location this evening as part of an operational review. Garrett Finch had gone very still. Not the stillness of composure, The stillness of a man whose internal calculations have all arrived at the same conclusion and who is waiting, in the gap before consequence, for something that is not coming. Mr. Moss would like to address the room. Harlan walked out from table 9, in the ruined jacket, the worn boots. He moved through the room without hurry, without performance, with the quality of someone who has been in enough rooms that the room itself is not the point. He stopped in front of Garrett, complete silence. Someone had finally found the music system. "I've been here for 91 minutes, Harlan said. Quiet, even. I've had audio running since I sat down. He held up the small phone, including a conversation that took place in the kitchen approximately 45 minutes ago. About the preparation of the Wagyu at table 9. Garrett opened his mouth. The meat was left at room temperature for over 2 hours before being returned to cold storage, Harlan continued. It was then retrieved tonight and prepared for a specific guest, deliberately. The murmur that moved through the dining room had weight to it. The sound of people who have been eating in a place they trusted and are now recalculating that trust in real time. Several forks went down. One guest pushed her plate away without looking at it. That is absolutely Garrett's professional surface cracking at its edges. That's fabricated. You have no $340,000, Harlan said. 20 months. Shell company registered in your wife's maiden name. He nodded to the lawyers. A document appeared, financial summary, headers visible from across the room. Our accounting team has been documenting this for 5 months. Garrett looked at the document, at the lawyers, at the security along the walls, at Harlan. Then, this was the part Harlan hadn't anticipated. Garrett smiled. Not the professional smile, not the warm one. Something underneath both. The smile of a man releasing something he'd been holding a long time, finding the release, even at this cost, something close to relief. You think this ends with me, he said. Harlan waited. Every budget variance at this location, Garrett said. Every authorization to skip independent auditing. Every decision that let this operation run the way it ran. He met Harlan's eyes. Those sign-offs didn't come from me. Patricia looked up from her notepad. They came from someone who's been inside your organization for 22 years, Garrett said. Philip Draker, your CFO. The earlier silence had been surprise. This was different. The silence of a stone dropping through still water, the surface closing over it, the depth of the impact not yet visible. Harlan didn't move. Philip Draker, who had built the financial architecture of everything Harlan had built, who had stood beside him at Evelyn's funeral, had held his arm during the graveside service, who had been the first call every morning for 2 decades, who Harlan had trusted without reviewing, because some people you trust without reviewing, because they have been there long enough, have shown you enough, that the habit of trust becomes its own kind of blindness. The scar on his right hand, he didn't look down at it, he felt it. Philip Draker, he said, the words flat. Nobody here worked alone, Garrett said, and something in his voice, for the first time all evening, was not performance. I want you to know I understand what's happening now. I'm not going to make it worse. Harlan looked at him for a long moment. Take him outside, he said to the security team. They moved. Garrett went without resistance. The resistance had already run out, somewhere in the past few minutes, and what remained was a man who had made his calculation and was living in its result. Harlan turned to the kitchen doorway. Tomas was standing there, apron gone, hands at his sides, the look of a man who has walked into a room from the other side and is now standing in the version of it that he'd been watching through a window. The room was looking at him. Harlan looked at him. You can tell the room what you know, he said. Or I can play the recording. Tomas looked at the room, at the guests with their phones finally openly out, not hiding the recording anymore, not managing curiosity, just documenting. At the lawyers with their documents, at Patricia with her notepad, at the kitchen door behind him, which led back to everything he'd been standing on. At Harlan. Garrett told me to use the meat from the returned order, he said, steady. The steadiness of someone who has decided and is now on the other side of deciding. It had been at room temperature for close to 2 hours before we put it back in cold storage. He told me no one would believe the guest at table 9 if he got sick. He said it would teach him a lesson for coming somewhere he didn't belong. The dining room broke open. Not with noise, with motion. Chairs pushed back, phones raised. A woman near the window stood up entirely. The couple at table 4 sat completely still, not looking at each other. Police are 3 minutes out, Patricia said at Harlan's shoulder. Philip. Already handled. He was flagged at O'Hare an hour ago. She kept her voice low for him only. He'd booked a one-way flight to Zurich 4 days ago. When Garrett's name came up in the financial review last week, I pulled travel records as a precaution. The flight doesn't exist anymore. He processed that. 4 days ago. Philip had known it was ending 4 days ago and had said nothing. Had booked a one-way flight and kept coming to work and kept returning Harlan's calls, right up until the moment he'd decided not to. 22 years. Nadia Okafor, Harlan said. Side exit, Patricia said. She's been out there for 23 minutes. I have something to show you first, she said. About her father. It changes the shape of something. He looked at her. 2 minutes, she said. Before you go out. She opened her laptop. The file was already on the screen, a scanned page from Harlan's own archive, his early records handwritten, digitized when they'd moved the company files a decade ago. His handwriting, younger, slightly larger. The writing of a man still becoming who he was going to be. M. Okafor, personal loan $8,000. No interest, no formal agreement. Repaid November 1997 with interest received under protest. And in the margin, M says just build the thing. I will. Harlan looked at the date, 1994. Keep going, he said. Patricia scrolled. His 2010. March 14th, Northwestern Memorial. Room 412, Marcus, 2 p.m. And below it a note added later the same day, the kind he sometimes added when something needed recording before it faded. Stayed until 6. He knew I was there, I think, even when he was asleep. Some people you can tell. Her father, Harlan said. Not a question. Marcus Okafor, Patricia confirmed. She's been working in your restaurant for 3 years. She warned you tonight because she recognized you, not from a photograph. From a hospital room she watched through a window in 2010. She told Detective Reyes everything, including that. He stood with it. The specific arithmetic of it. Marcus, who had handed over $8,000 in 1994, because he'd looked at a desperate 28-year-old and seen something worth believing in, who had died in 2010 in room 412 of Northwestern Memorial, whose daughter had been in the hallway that afternoon, watching through the glass, not knowing who the man with the scar was, who had been working in his restaurant for 3 years, who tonight had written 4 sentences on a matchbook-sized piece of paper and put everything she had on the table to make sure he didn't eat a plate of food someone had designed to harm him. There's one more thing, Patricia said. She reached into her jacket, produced a small plastic sleeve, archival protection, the kind used for documents requiring preservation. Inside, a business card, his, one of the originals from 2008 before the redesign. On the back in handwriting that was not his. If you need anything, call him. He's good. I found this, Patricia said carefully. When I was reviewing the personal records Harlan Moss LLC maintains for key historical relationships. In 2010, after the hospital visit, you sent Marcus Okafor's family a formal letter of condolence through the company, standard procedure for significant personal relationships. The letter came back undeliverable. The estate records you filed with our legal team at the time, the documentation of the relationship for our own archive, included an itemized list of items you'd given him over the years. This card was on that list. When I found it in our own archive 3 days ago during the pre-visit review, I requested the original from storage. He held the sleeve. He wrote on the back of it, Harlan said. Yes, it was in the company archive, the copy we retained. He must have done it before he went into the hospital. The card, Marcus's handwriting on the back. If you need anything, call him. He's good. Written for his daughter. Kept in the records of the company he'd helped found, in a file that had been sitting in storage for 14 years, while the daughter had been living her life without knowing there was a door. She never knew, Harlan said. She was 20 years old and managing a newborn and her father's death at the same time, Patricia said. Our condolence letter came back undeliverable because the address had changed. She moved twice in the year after he died. And she never contacted the company. She had no reason to know she could. He looked at the restaurant door. At the side exit beyond which a woman was sitting on cold stone steps doing the arithmetic of catastrophe. Go, Patricia said. Simply. The stone steps, Callaway Street, 8:57 p.m. The cold arrived immediately. Chicago November didn't ease you into it. It was simply there when the door opened, full and declarative, the kind of cold that clarifies things by removing everything non-essential. Nadia was sitting on the bottom step, coat on, the inadequate one, the one she'd been meaning to replace. Both hands flat on the stone beside her hips, eyes aimed at the street in front of her, which was doing what streets do on a Saturday night, moving, indifferent, having its own evening. She heard the door, didn't turn. He came down the steps and sat beside her, not close enough to crowd, close enough that the cold was a shared thing, something between them rather than around each of them separately. Neither of them spoke. The street ran its light and noise past them. A cab. Two people walking fast with their collars up. The sound of another restaurant down the block, door opening. Someone laughing at something. Harlan sat with the cold and let it do what cold did. Then he was wrong, by the way. She looked at him. Sideways, careful, Garrett, he said, about what he told Tomas, about no one believing you. She looked back at the street. I wasn't counting on being believed, she said. I know. I wrote the note because it was the right thing to do. Not because I thought it would work out. I know that too. She glanced at him again. Longer this time. He was looking at the street the way she was, not at anything specific, just at the general fact of it. The same posture, the same way of being in a space. What happens now, she said, still not quite a question. Tonight, police statements, the restaurant closes. The operation has been compromised and needs to be taken apart and rebuilt from the frame. He paused. Garrett is being processed. Philip Draker, my CFO, the person who gave Garrett cover, was stopped at O'Hare an hour ago. Your CFO, 22 years. She absorbed that. I'm sorry, she said. He looked at her. 22 years is real, she said. That's a real loss, regardless of what he did. Something in him went very quiet. This woman who had just lost her job because she'd done the right thing, sitting on cold stone, offering him condolence for the betrayal of a man who had been helping to run the operation that had just tried to poison someone. Your father was like that, he said before he'd decided to say it. She went still. He'd said it too soon. He'd meant to find a better moment, meant to have Patricia show him what she'd found, meant to understand the full shape of it before he brought it into this conversation. But the words had arrived on their own, pulled out by something. What do you know about my father? She said. Quiet, not hostile. The question of someone who genuinely doesn't know the answer and needs to. He looked at her. Marcus Okafor, he said. She turned to face him fully. I met him in 1994, Harlan said. I had a business plan and no money, and every person I'd shown it to had given me a version of. Not the right time, not the right market, not the right candidate for financing. He stopped, found the next words. Your father looked at it for 20 minutes, then he said, You'll be fine. Just go build the thing. She made a sound, barely audible, the sound of someone recognizing something they've heard before, not these exact words, but this exact rhythm. His rhythm. He gave me $8,000, Harlan said. No contract, no interest, no conditions. I opened the first Whitmore's in 1995. He never told me, she said. He wouldn't have. That wasn't why he did it. She was looking at her hands now. Both of them flat on her knees. I repaid him in 1997. He took the interest only because I told him I wouldn't deliver the money if he didn't. He paused. We had dinner after, talked for 3 hours. I saw him once more after that, 2010. She looked up. Northwestern Memorial, he said. The thing that moved in her face then was not a small thing. Room 412, he said. I heard through someone we both knew that he was there. I went. I was in the hallway, she said. Her voice was different now, lower, coming from somewhere further back. I saw you through the window. I didn't come in because it seemed private. Like something I shouldn't interrupt. I didn't know you were there. He was mostly asleep, I know. I sat with him anyway. She looked at the street for a moment, at nothing, at everything. He died the next morning, she said. Yes, I never found out who you were a breath. I thought about it for years, the man with the scar. I thought about him too, Harlan said. About whether I'd honored what he gave me, whether what I built was worth his belief in it. He looked at the restaurant door. Tonight I'm not sure it is. Don't, she said. He looked at her. One manager and one CFO and their choices, that's not a verdict on the foundation. She met his eyes directly. You built something good, and then you managed it from too far away, and someone used the distance. That's a warning about what comes next. It's not a verdict on what you built. He held her gaze. You're right, he said. I know, a beat. Short, almost not quite, a laugh moved through him. Not at her, at the specific delivery. At the way she said I know the way her father used to say just go build the thing, without apology, without hedging, because the thought was true and truth didn't need softening. When you wrote the note, he said, you knew what it would cost. I'd run the numbers, she said, before I went back out, and you did it anyway. My mother used to say, the cost of silence is paid by someone else. She looked at the street. I couldn't do the calculation on what it would cost me, and then look away from what it would cost you if I didn't. The math only runs one way. That's courage, he said. It was terrifying, she said. Courage isn't the absence of terror. No, he said. It's what you do in the middle of it. She nodded, slowly, like she was hearing it said out loud for the first time and deciding if she agreed. She agreed. The cold kept its position around them. Across the street in the black car with the running lights, Patricia was watching. She had a document open on her laptop, a scan of something old, something she'd found in the company archive 3 days ago, and had been deciding how to present ever since. She'd found the right moment now. She could see it, even from across the street, even through the windshield. The right moment was when both of them had said what they needed to say, and the silence between them had gone from heavy to clear. That silence was arriving. She got out of the car, the stone steps and archive. 9:14 p.m. Patricia came down Calloway Street with the laptop under her arm and stopped at the bottom of the steps. Looked at both of them. When you're ready, she said to Harlan, but yes, now would be the right moment. He looked at Nadia. This involves you, he said. Both of us. Nadia looked at Patricia with the measured attention she used when deciding whether to trust a room. Patricia held the look without performing anything in return. Just returned it directly, which was apparently the right response, because Nadia nodded once. Patricia set the laptop on the step between them, opened it, turned the screen so both could see. A scanned document. Old paper, slightly yellowed at the edges. Harlan's handwriting, his early handwriting, before it had settled into what it was now. M. Okafor, personal loan, $8,000 interest, no formal agreement. Repaid November 1997 with interest received under protest. In the margin, smaller. M says just build the thing. I will. Nadia looked at it for a long time. 1994, Harlan said. He gave me that without a contract. Without conditions. I opened the first Whitmore's the following year. He never told me, she said. He wouldn't. That wasn't why he did it. Patricia scrolled, his calendar 2010, March 14th, Northwestern Memorial, Room 4, Marcus, 2 p.m. And below it, the note added later that same day, stayed until 6. He knew I was there, I think, even when he was asleep. Some people you can tell. Nadia read the note. Read it again. He knew, she said. Quietly. I believed he did, Harlan said. He was mostly asleep, but there was something in the room. She looked at the date, March 14th. Her father had died on March 15th. She looked at the note. He knew I was there. Her father in room 412 in his last days. And this man had driven to that hospital on a Tuesday afternoon and had stayed for 4 hours, and had believed that presence mattered even when the person couldn't fully receive it. There's one more thing, Patricia said. She reached into her jacket pocket, produced a small archival sleeve, inside, a business card. Harlan's, one of the original ones, 2008 design. On the back, in her father's handwriting, she knew it immediately, before she'd consciously processed what she was looking at. If you need anything, call him. He's good. Nadia held the sleeve. Where did you find this, she said. In the company archive, Patricia said. After your father died, the company sent a formal letter of condolence, standard procedure for significant personal relationships. The letter came back undeliverable. Your address had changed. But we retained the documentation in our own archive. The record of the relationship, the correspondence history. This card was listed as an item Harlan had given your father. I found the record 3 days ago during the pre-visit review and requested the original from our storage facility. Nadia looked at the handwriting. If you need anything, call him. He's good. Written by a man who had known, at some point before he'd gone into that hospital, that his daughter might need a door he couldn't leave open himself. Who had taken a business card and written on the back of it and kept it, probably in his wallet, which was the place her father kept things that mattered, so that she would find it. Except she hadn't found it. She'd moved twice in the year after he died, twice in the chaos of grief and a newborn daughter and the complete reorganization of what her life was going to be. The estate process had been minimal, because there hadn't been much estate. Whatever had been in the wallet had gone into a box that had gone into storage, that had eventually been unpacked when she'd settled into the apartment on the south side. She didn't remember finding a business card. She didn't remember not finding one either. "He wrote it for me," she said. "Yes," Harlan said. He knew. She looked at the handwriting. He knew he wasn't coming home and he wanted to leave a door open. "Yes, and I never found it." "No," Harlan said, "and I didn't look hard enough after the condolence letter came back. I wrote a note to myself, find his family, make sure they're okay, and then other things came in and I managed it from a distance, which means I didn't do it." She looked up at him. "I'm not saying that to perform accountability," he said. "I'm saying it because it's true and because you should hear it said clearly." She held the sleeve for a moment longer, then set it carefully on the step between them. "He was right about you," she said. Whatever he saw in 1994, Harlan said nothing. "A person who goes to sit with someone in the last days, for no reason except that it matters, that's who my father would loan $8,000 to," she said. "He read people well. He was right about you. The cold around them, the street above them doing it Saturday night. And he would be frustrated," she said, "that it took you this long to look at what was happening in your own restaurant." "Yes," Harlan said, "he would." "He wouldn't say so," she said. "He'd just look at you. You probably know the look." "I know the look." A beat, and then, small reel, the first one of the evening, something close to a laugh moved through both of them. Not at anything funny. At the specific relief of truth arriving in the right form, which is sometimes the form of being known by someone who has no reason to protect you from it. Patricia closed the laptop, gave them a moment. "Then, the police will need statements from both of you. Reyes is inside." Harlan looked at Nadia. "After that," he said, "if you're willing, I'd like to talk about what happened in this restaurant." She looked at the building behind her, looked at him. "Yes," she said, "I'm willing." Patricia stood, started back toward the entrance. Harlan stood, held out his right hand. Nadia looked at it, the scar white and unguarded under the streetlight, took it. Stood. They went back inside. Whitmore's the empty dining room, 9:55 p.m. The restaurant emptied the way rooms empty after something real has happened in them. Not with friction. Not with the chaos of people being moved out before they're ready. The guests left with the particular quietness of people who understood they were no longer the event, that the event had moved past them, and their continued presence was logistical rather than meaningful. The police worked methodically. Two detectives, experienced in the way that reads in movement rather than manner, photographed the untouched plate at table 9, went through the kitchen with careful attention, documented the refrigeration logs. The health department was notified. Garrett had left with the uniformed officers, without performance, without a final declaration. Just a man putting his hands where they needed to go. The lawyers handled the rest. By 9:40, the restaurant was empty. Patricia had coordinated the last logistics, temporary closure filing, staff communication protocol for the morning. And then she had gone too, after asking if he needed anything, after he'd said no, after she'd said the car would be outside for another hour. And then the room was simply the room. Harlan sat at the south window. Not table 9. He'd moved the chair to face the window directly, a slight repositioning that meant he was looking out rather than into the room. The street below was nighttime quiet. A few pedestrians, the restaurant block settling into its late evening version. Somewhere down the street, another restaurant was still going. He could hear, just barely, the sound of its door opening and closing. He pressed his right hand flat against the window glass. The cold came through immediately. He thought about Philip. He'd been managing the thought at professional distance all evening. Evidence, liability, board notification, legal strategy. Clean categories, containable. Now alone, he went to the part that actually weighed something, 22 years. The first time Philip had found a significant accounting error, not his own, a contractor's, someone overbilling on a construction project, he'd brought it to Harlan with the documentation already prepared and the correction already calculated. Hadn't needed instruction, hadn't needed praise, just, here's the problem, here's the fix, here's the work. That was 2002. Harlan had thought, this is the person you build something real with. He'd been right for a long time, and then wrong. The transition, from trustworthy to predatory, had happened inside the same body over the same years in the same relationship. Harlan didn't know exactly when. The audit would establish the timeline. What he knew was that Philip had kept coming to work, had kept returning calls, had stood beside him at Evelyn's funeral and held his arm during the graveside service and said afterward, "She was the best part of everything you built. She believed in it more than you did on the days you couldn't." He'd meant it. Harlan was nearly certain he'd meant it, and had also, at some point in those same years, been using the infrastructure he'd spent 22 years building to take from it, and had booked a one-way flight to Zurich 4 days ago, which meant he'd known the ending was coming and had chosen exit over accountability, had kept showing up, kept calling back, right until the moment he'd decided he wouldn't. Some understanding, Harlan thought, doesn't arrive at the end of a process. Some things stay incomprehensible, and maybe that was the more accurate thing, to hold it as incomprehensible rather than solved, to resist the temptation to explain it in a way that made it make sense, because the making sense was a kind of comfort he hadn't earned yet. He pulled his hand from the window, turned back to the room. The bones of it, under the flat house lights the police had required, were still good. High ceilings. Materials chosen for durability rather than flash. The original designer had understood what this room was supposed to be, had built it with real intention, which you could see once you stopped looking at the surface and looked at the structure underneath. He walked to the corner where table 9 had been, evidence tags where the table had been. The tablecloth slightly rumpled from the police team's work, replaced imperfectly, which gave the corner a different quality now. Less punishing, just a corner. He looked at the south wall. 3 windows. The afternoon light those windows caught, when the restaurant was open for an afternoon, which it hadn't been for 11 years, because no one had asked why it wasn't. He made a note, in the place where he kept things that became decisions, that the south tables were moving. That the community table would go by the south window, where the light came in. That table 9 was moving to the best seat in the house. The side office door opened. Patricia appeared in the doorway. She hadn't gone after all, or had come back, or had simply never fully left. 12 years of working for someone created its own kind of gravity. "Nadia's done with her statement," she said. "Ray's released her. She's waiting in the side office." "Send her in," he said. "She asked to come out here," Patricia said. She said, and I'm quoting, "I want to see the room the way it is right now, before anyone fixes it." He looked at the room, at the evidence tags and the imperfect tablecloth and the flat light and the bones of a place that had been built with intention and then left to become something else. "Send her in," he said again. Side office. 10:08 p.m. Detective Reyes was thorough in the way of someone who understood that the thoroughness was the point. Not just for building the case, but for making sure the person across the table understood that what they'd experienced was being taken seriously. Harlan gave the full account. Every decision from the moment he'd left the penthouse, the jacket, the phone, the positioning at table 9. The conversation he'd recorded in the kitchen. Reyes had a copy now, transferred to the department system. The note. He described the moment Nadia had passed it, the way she'd done it, the precision of the motion that had meant no one watching had seen anything at all. "She knew what she was doing," Reyes said. "She knew exactly," Harlan agreed. "She also knew who you were," Reyes said. "Not a question." Harlan paused. "She recognized me," he said. "Not from public photos, from something personal. We have a connection through her father that neither of us fully understood until tonight." Reyes wrote something, looked up. "Did that affect her decision, to warn you?" Harlan thought about this honestly. "I think it informed it," he said. "The recognition, it may have been what made her look closely enough to see that something was wrong. But the decision itself, the choice to write that note, to risk what she was risking, I don't think that came from knowing who I was. That came from who she is." Reyes nodded slowly, made another note. "One more thing," he said. Garrett Finch mentioned in his statement that he had been operating with the knowledge and authorization of Philip Draker. He's indicated he's willing to cooperate fully. "I've been told Draker is in custody," Harlan said. "At O'Hare," he came quietly. Reyes set down his pen. "In my experience, people who come quietly at airports have usually made a calculation about what cooperation is worth. I'd expect him to provide a very complete account of the arrangement." "He built the systems," Harlan said. "He'll know where everything is." "That's what I'd expect." Harlan looked at the table between them, at the recorder, at the case number written at the top of Reyes's notepad in the neat, slightly compressed handwriting of someone who filled a lot of notepads. The server, Harlan said. Nadia Okafor. She lost her job tonight because she did the right thing. I want that in the record, that the suspension Garrett announced was fabricated, that there was no complaint from any guest, that the only thing she did was warn the man at table 9 not to eat food that had been deliberately prepared to harm him. It's already in the record, Reyes said. She told me herself clearly. Good, Harlan said. Mr. Moss, Reyes looked at him directly. Off the record for 30 seconds. Harlan waited. What you did tonight, the operational review, the disguise, whatever you want to call it, I understand why you did it, and the outcome was clearly important. A pause. But there are safer ways to investigate your own establishments. I know, Harlan said. There are professional investigators who specialize in exactly this kind of. I know, Harlan said again. But professional investigators couldn't have told me what I learned tonight. They would have told me what happened, not what it felt like to be inside it. Reyes looked at him for a moment. Fair enough, he said. We're done. Harlan stood in the doorway. He stopped. The employee Tomas Ibarra, he said. The sous chef, I know who he is. He made a bad choice under significant duress. Then he made the right choice in front of 40 people with everything to lose. Whatever the DA decides, I'll be communicating clearly about both parts of that. Reyes nodded, wrote something. Harlan went back into the restaurant. Whitmore's, the empty dining room, 10:52 p.m. Nadia came out of the side office. The police statement had taken 40 minutes. Reyes had been thorough in the way of someone who understood that thoroughness was itself a form of respect, who took the full account without rushing any of it. She'd given him everything: the kitchen, the spice rack, the bathroom, the handwriting that shook, the 30 feet from the kitchen to table 9. He'd listened and written and asked precise follow-up questions that told her he was building something that would hold. When she'd stood to leave, he'd said, "For what it's worth, Miss Okafor, you were the clearest witness I've had in a month." She'd said, "Thank you," and meant it in the way you mean things when you're too tired to mean them at more than face value. Now she walked into the dining room, stopped, looked at it. She'd known this room for 3 years, had moved through it thousands of times, had learned its traffic patterns and its problem areas, and the specific places where the lighting was slightly off, and the table slightly tilted, and the draft came through the service door. She'd known it the way you know a place you spend 60 hours a week in, practically, specifically, without romance. She didn't know it like this. Under the flat police lights, with the chairs at odd angles and the tablecloths slightly rumpled, and the evidence tags in the corner where table 9 had been, the room looked like what it was. Like a place. Just a place. Bones and materials and the choices of people who had built it and then let it drift from what it was supposed to be. Good bones. She stood and looked at them. Harlan was at the south window, not sitting, standing, one hand against the glass, looking out at the street below. She crossed the room and stood beside him. "Didn't speak first," he said. She was right. She waited. "Evelyn." "The letter." He didn't move his hand from the glass. "She tried to tell me twice. I've been thinking about when those conversations were. I can find the shape of them. Dinner, probably, or a phone call. I can find my own response. I'll look into it. Let me check with the team. I'm sure it's fine." He paused. "I can't find the moments themselves because they didn't land. They came in and went through me and I kept moving. You opened the letter tonight," she said, 3 years late. "But tonight," he looked at her. "That's not nothing," she said. "You opened it and you came here. Tonight you could have sent someone. You could have hired investigators. You could have managed it from a comfortable distance, the same way you managed everything else. Instead, I put on a ruined jacket and almost ate poisoned steak," he said. "Instead, you put on a ruined jacket and sat at the worst table in your own restaurant for 90 minutes, she said, "and paid attention. And that is different from sending someone." He turned to look at the room. "The bones are good," he said. "Yes, the south windows. No one's ever used the afternoon light. The restaurant closes at 2 and opens at 5, she said. The afternoon light is wasted every day." He looked at the window. "Community lunch," she said. "Saturdays and Sundays. Using the afternoon service. The south tables for anyone who wants them. Good light, good food, whatever people can offer." He absorbed this. "How long have you been thinking about that?" he said. "Since my 2nd week," she said. "When I understood what this room could be and what it was being used for instead." He nodded slowly. "I want you to run this restaurant," he said. "General manager, from before it reopens. You'd be part of deciding what it becomes." Nadia looked at the room, not at him. At the room which was the thing being offered, the thing whose possibilities she'd been calculating for 3 years from the wrong side of the authority to change them. I have conditions, she said. Name them. B's healthcare, full family coverage from the day I start. Not from when the restaurant reopens, from the day I start. Done. Darius finishes his degree. He's 1 semester out. Whatever support gets him through that semester gets figured out before I sign anything. Done. She looked at the wall beside the entrance, the blank wall near the door, which she'd been aware of every day for 3 years as a space that was doing nothing when it could be doing something. The note, she said. The one I wrote tonight. I want it framed, right there, where anyone who walks in sees it before they see anything else. What do you want below it? She'd been thinking about this since the bathroom, since before she'd walked back out. Dignity is not a privilege. It is what we owe each other. He said nothing, just held the words in the room. And one more line, she said. Below that, smaller, for Marcus Okafor, who believed first the room was very still. He looked at the wall where the frame would go. Done, he said. All of it. She nodded, clean. The nod of someone who has said what needed saying and received what was needed back. One question, she said. Ask it. The man who sat at that table tonight, who paid attention, who waited for the right moment, who understood what was at stake from the inside out. She met his eyes. Is that who runs this company now, or is that who you used to be? He looked at her. She didn't look away. I used to be that person, he said. Tonight reminded me what he knew. I can't promise I'll be him perfectly going forward. What I can tell you is that I understand now what it costs when I'm not, and I didn't used to understand that. Not the way I do after tonight. She held his gaze. That's an honest answer, she said. I'm trying to give you honest answers. I know. She looked at the room one more time, at what it was now and what it was going to become. That's why I'm saying yes. Tomas Ibarra's kitchen. 11:34 p.m. he was making eggs. It was the thing he made when he needed to make something, when his hands needed to be doing the work of feeding someone without the pressure of service, without tickets and timing, and the accumulated weight of a professional kitchen running at capacity. Just eggs, a pan, the simple chemistry of heat and protein. Rosie was at the table. She was supposed to be in bed. He'd told her to go to bed when he came in, had said he was fine, he just needed to decompress. She should sleep. She'd looked at him the way she looked at him when she understood that fine was not quite accurate, and had put on her robe and come to the kitchen and sat down. He told her everything. It took longer than he expected. Not because the events were complicated. They were actually quite sequential, one thing leading to the next, but because explaining it meant he had to stay inside each moment, long enough to describe it, which was different from getting through the moments as they happened. The order, his nod, Nadia in the kitchen, the dining room, the man at the table 9 who had not eaten. The phone call from Rosie about the baby's kick. Standing in the doorway, walking out. Rosie listened to all of it without interrupting. The eggs finished, he plated them, sat across from her. She looked at the plate, then at him. You nodded, she said. Yes, and then you walked out and told the truth. Yes, in front of 40 people, 40-something. She looked at him. Tomas, I know, you should have said no when he asked, you know that. I know, you're going to have to figure out what to do with that, for yourself. Not for the job or the legal stuff, for yourself. He pushed the eggs around the plate. I know, but you also walked out. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. When it mattered, when the person who'd been hurt was already walking out the door, you walked out too. And you told the truth. Too late, later than you should have, she said. Not too late for it to matter. Those are different. He looked at her. She looked back with the directness of a woman who had been with him for 6 years, and had decided, at the beginning of those 6 years, that she wasn't going to manage his self-perception for him. Which meant she didn't soften things, and she didn't inflate things. She just told him where she saw it landing. You're going to be a good father, she said. Not because you're perfect. Because tonight you did a hard thing when you understood what was at stake. She needs to know you can do that. She's not born yet. She kicked today, Rosie said. She's paying attention. He laughed. It surprised him, the laugh arriving in a moment this heavy, but there it was, real and small and necessary. He ate the eggs. She talked about the kick, described it again, the way it had moved across, the surprise of how strong it had felt, the strange intimacy of a person making themselves known from inside. He listened, asked questions, let the ordinary miracle of it move him the way it had when she'd called. At one point, around midnight, his phone buzzed. He almost didn't look. Then he looked. A message from a number he didn't have saved. He read the name at the top of the message. The sender had identified himself. Harlan Moss, 3 weeks, call Patricia to set the meeting. Bring your knives. He stared at it. Read it again. Rosie was watching his face. What? He turned the phone so she could see. She read it, looked up at him. Bring your knives, she said. It means he wants me in the kitchen, Tomas said. If I want it. She looked at him steadily. Do you? He thought about the Whitmore's kitchen, the bones of it, the equipment, the layout, the line that ran well when it was run right. He thought about what it would mean to be in that kitchen, with the authority to run it the way it should run, with the accountability that came with that authority. He thought about the meeting where Garrett had stood beside him at the grill and said things that Tomas had not known how to refuse. He thought about 3 weeks from now, about walking into a different version of that kitchen, about being the person at the grill that someone else came to stand beside. Yes, he said. Rosie nodded. Then call Patricia, she said. In the morning, he set the phone down. They sat in their kitchen. Late, the city quiet outside. The baby, their daughter, already mapping her space, already making herself known, was probably still now, probably resting the way she rested after a day of movement. He thought about what he'd said in the dining room, the words he'd found when he'd needed them. Simple words, just facts, just the account of what had happened. He thought about whether he'd known he had them. He hadn't known. He'd found out the same moment the room had. Whitmore's on Callaway Street. 3 months later, February. The sign on the door during the renovation had said, closed for renewal. Reopening February 14th. Thank you for your patience. Someone had taped a hand-drawn heart next to it in the first week. Nobody removed it. It was still there on the day the restaurant reopened. Slightly weathered, the tape yellowing at the edges, the heart drawn in red marker in the handwriting of someone young enough that the lines weren't quite steady. Nadia had noticed it on the first day of construction and had decided without deliberating that it was staying. The renovation had been her first real test as general manager. Not the decisions about menu or staffing, but this one. Figuring out what to keep and what to change. How much of the original design was worth preserving and how much had been compromised by the years of use and misuse and the specific rot that had settled into it. She'd spent a week just walking the space before she let the contractors start anything. Not measuring, walking, sitting in different chairs at different times of day, standing at the pass where the kitchen opened to the dining room, and imagining what the view from there should feel like. What a kitchen should look like when it was running honestly. Standing at the entrance and asking herself, when someone walks through this door, what do we want to be the first thing they feel? Not the first thing they see, the first thing they feel. The answer to that question had driven almost every decision after. The lighting, softer, not dimmer, softer. The difference between light that flatters and light that welcomes. The table arrangement, redistributed. The extra covers near the back wall were gone. Each table had the space it needed to exist without crowding its neighbors, which meant slightly fewer covers per service and slightly better conversations at every one of them. The south windows. 3 tables now caught the afternoon light. The restaurant had expanded its service to include weekend lunches, which meant those tables were actually used, which meant the light wasn't wasted anymore. Table 9 was by the south window. That had been Nadia's specific decision, not to eliminate the table number, because that would have been a kind of pretense, a pretending that the thing hadn't happened, but to relocate it, to give it the best position in the house, to turn the thing that had been used as punishment into the thing that was offered first. The frame was by the entrance, simple, glass-fronted, white matte. A small piece of paper creased from having been folded and unfolded, the handwriting slightly uneven in the way of a hand that had been shaking. Don't eat, the meat is bad, this was planned, please trust me. Below it on a small brass plate, dignity is not a privilege. It is what we owe each other, and below that in smaller text, for Marcus Okafor. Who believed first? Nadia had put it up herself the week before opening. Had stood back and looked at it for a long time. Had thought about her father, not the hospital version, not the dying version, but the one she'd grown up watching. The man who fixed things without being asked, who showed up without announcement, who handed over $8,000 to a stranger because he looked at the stranger and saw something the stranger couldn't yet see himself. She'd thought, this is the closest I can get to putting him in the room. It would have to be enough. It was enough. Opening day, 6 o'clock. The staff arrived at 4 for the final walkthrough. 12 people, a mix of experienced servers and 2 who had never worked in a restaurant, which Nadia had done deliberately. She believed in institutional knowledge, and she also believed in the fresh eye, the person who didn't know yet which questions you weren't supposed to ask, and therefore asked them. She gathered them at the entrance. Before we go through anything operational, she said, I want everyone to read that. She nodded at the frame, they read it. She watched their faces, the landing of it. Each person in sequence, the slight adjustment of expression that happened when the words reached whatever place words reach when they're true. Then she told them the story. All of it. The man in the ruined jacket, the bad table, the kitchen conversation she'd heard from behind the spice rack, the bathroom, the folded paper, the moment of transfer at table 9, what it had cost, what had happened after. She told it plainly, without drama, the way her father would have told it if he'd been someone who told his own stories, which he hadn't been. When she finished, the room was very quiet. That's what we're doing here, she said. Not serving food, though we're doing that too, and we're doing it well. But that's not the first thing. The first thing is this. Every person who comes through that door gets the same from us. Full attention, full respect, full care. Whether they're spending $200 or they're at the community table. Whether they're in the right clothes for this room or not. Whether anyone else in the city would give them the time of day or not. She looked around at their faces. The community table, said one of the new hires, young, slightly nervous, first restaurant job. How does that work exactly? Standing menu, full meals, whatever someone can offer, that's what they pay. If they can't offer anything, they still eat. She paused. No application, no questions, no making them explain themselves. They sit down, they eat, they leave feeling like they were welcome. That's the whole job. The young woman nodded. What if someone takes advantage? What if someone who could pay uses the community menu? Then they eat a good meal, Nadia said. And we move on. We're not here to police who deserves what. We're here to make sure nobody leaves hungry if we can help it. The woman absorbed this. Okay, she said simply. I can do that. Thomas appeared in the kitchen doorway, apron on, the kitchen already running its prep behind him. He looked at Nadia. She nodded. Kitchen's ready, he said. Then we're ready, she said to the room. Let's open. The doors opened at 6. The first guests were a couple, regulars from before the closure, who had apparently been waiting specifically for this night. They came in with the careful optimism of people who loved a place and had been hurt by what it had become, and were hoping cautiously that what it was becoming would be worth the return. Nadia greeted them at the door. She watched their faces as they came in. The moment they saw the room, the way it had changed, the light and the spacing and the general atmosphere of a place that had decided to take its own mission statement seriously. The woman stopped just inside the entrance, looked at the frame on the wall, read it, turned to her husband, said something too quiet to hear. He read it, they looked at each other, then they walked in and sat down, and the evening began. At 8:15 the door opened again. Nadia was near the entrance, managing the early seating transition. She saw him come in before anyone else did. An older man, 70s maybe. Heavy coat with the particular wear pattern of something bought for warmth and used exactly that way, without concern for appearance. Boots resoled twice. He moved the way people move when they've spent a long time entering rooms and being told, directly or indirectly, that they'd misjudged the situation. He stopped just inside the door, looked at the host stand, looked at the room, looked at the host stand again, as if recalibrating. The young hostess? First real job, excellent instincts, Nadia had known from the first interview, glanced at Nadia. Nadia was already moving. Welcome to Whitmore's, she said, her full attention on his face. Not the professional attention version, the actual version. Just you tonight. Waiting. Table by the window, she said. Best seat we have, come on. She led him to table 9, south window. The February sky outside was dark, but the street below was lit. The warm orange of the street lamps, the subtle movement of a Saturday evening settling in. A couple at the table adjacent were deep in a conversation that had clearly been going on for some time. 2 women at the table behind were laughing about something, She set the menu down. Our community menu is on the back, she said. No pressure either way, whatever works for you tonight. He looked at the menu, looked at her. I don't. He stopped. Try it again. I'm not sure I have enough for. You have enough, she said. No preamble, no softening. You're at the table. That's the whole thing. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face. Not the dramatic movement of someone being overcome, but the small, specific movement of someone absorbing something they had not expected to be offered and are deciding whether they can afford to trust it. He sat down. Thank you, he said quietly. Of course, she said. She left him to the menu, walked back toward the entrance. Past the frame on the wall. She didn't stop. She didn't need to read it. She knew every word, every crease. The way the pen had pressed harder at the T in trust, because her hand had steadied itself against the counter in that bathroom. She knew it the way you know the things you wrote in the dark, which is differently from any other kind of knowing. She walked past it and said very quietly to the air beside it, Hi, Dad, not for anyone else. Not performed, just said. The way you say things to people who aren't in the room but are still somehow in the room. The restaurant moved around her, tables filling, conversations building, the kitchen running with the particular sound of a kitchen being run honestly. No shortcuts, no compromises, just food being made by people who understood what the food was for. At 9:30, the last person she expected walked through the door, Harlan. He'd called earlier in the week, said he'd like to come for the opening night if that was all right, as a guest, not as management, and she'd said yes. She'd half expected him to cancel. The Philip Draker legal proceedings were complex. The board had needed significant management in the weeks since November. She'd spoken to him twice about operational decisions, and both times there had been other things pressing at the edges of the conversation. But here he was, in a good jacket this time, dark wool appropriate for the room, face clean. The wedding ring on his right hand where he'd moved it 3 years ago and where it would probably stay. He looked around the room. She watched him look. The south tables, the spacing, the lighting, the frame on the wall, which he looked at for a long moment before he looked away. He saw her. General manager, he said. Paying customer, she said. Table for one, I have just the spot. She led him to table 9 south window. He looked at the window, at the street below, at the adjacent tables. Best seat in the house, she said. It is now, he said. She handed him the menu. The short rib is honest, she said. He looked up, a question in his expression. It's what it says it is, she said. Does exactly what it's supposed to do. No pretension. Short rib, good choice. She started to go. Nadia, she stopped. He was looking at the room. Not at her. At the room. The whole of it, the way it was running, the way the staff moved through it, the quality of attention happening at every table. Your father would have. He stopped. Started differently. He would have approved of this. She looked at the room too. He would have said it was just doing the obvious thing, she said, and then he would have gone and done the next obvious thing. Yes, Harlan said. He would have. She left him to his dinner. She had a room to run. At 10:45, after the dinner rush had crested and the evening was settling into its later rhythm, she found a moment to stand at the entrance. Just stand there. Looking at the room, tables with conversations in them. The older man at the window table, he'd ordered from the community menu and eaten the whole thing, and was now sitting with a cup of coffee, not hurried, not performing gratitude, just sitting in a room where he'd been welcomed and taking the time he needed. The couple who'd come in first and read the frame and looked at each other. They were on dessert now, still talking, the kind of conversation that had been going since before they sat down and would probably continue in the car. Tomas's kitchen running clean behind the pass. The new hire checking in with her tables, getting it right, making the thing look easy in the way that only looks easy when it's actually being done well. This was what a room could be. Not perfect, not every night would be this. There would be difficult services and difficult guests and the 10,000 small problems that running a restaurant produced without interruption. She knew that she had no illusions about the daily reality of the work, but this was what you aimed for. This was the version that was possible when the people in the room understood why they were there. She looked at the frame. At the small piece of paper in its glass-fronted case, "Don't eat, the meat is bad, this was planned, please trust me." 4 sentences she had written while her hands were shaking. 4 sentences that had cost her everything she'd been afraid to lose. and given her this room, this work, this chance to build something that her father would have recognized as worth building. She thought about him, not the hospital. Before that, the man she'd grown up watching, the way he'd moved through the world without requiring it to notice. The way he'd looked at a 28-year-old stranger with a business plan and 8,000 reasons to say no and had said, "Just go build the thing." She thought about Harlan at table 9, with his right hand flat on the tablecloth and the scar visible and the short rib in front of him, eating his dinner in the room that bore his name and had finally, after a long and painful course correction, become what he'd meant it to be. She thought about Bia, who was home with the neighbor's daughter, probably already asleep, toes tucked under herself, breathing the slightly heavy breath of a child who was fine, who was safe, whose mother had managed the math. She thought about Darius, who had called 2 days ago to say that the tuition situation had been sorted out and he'd been to see his advisor and was on track to graduate in May. She thought about the man at the window table with his coffee. Then she stopped thinking and went back to work. The room needed her, and she was finally exactly where she was supposed to be.